The Spitfire didn't fall so much as give up, cartwheeling through the grey Kent sky after a Me-110's cannon shells tore through its frame. Smoke drowned the cockpit. The pilot fought the controls until the flames forced him to bail out into the sharp autumn air of 1940. Hours later, instead of a dungeon or a boot to the ribs, he found himself sinking into a comfortable armchair at a quiet compound outside Frankfurt, Oberursel. A smiling Luftwaffe officer poured properly brewed English tea and asked, almost kindly, about his parachute bruises. It was the pilot's first hint that he had stepped into something far more dangerous than a prison camp. Welcome to WWII, Nazi Germany's transit and interrogation hub for every Allied airman unlucky enough to be captured over Europe. And on that October morning, the Germans were confident. Very confident. They believed they understood the minds of British pilots better than the British did themselves. Their interrogators weren't thugs. They were educated officers who treated information like gold dust. They studied RAF habits, squadron rivalries, even the pubs aircrews preferred. Their method: no threats, no shouting, just warmth, sympathy, and the illusion that the two of them were simply professionals talking shop. And it worked. During the Battle of France, these polite conversations had given the Luftwaffe astonishing insight into Allied order of battle. What made RAF airmen so valuable wasn't just what they knew, it was how current their knowledge was. Radio frequencies, squadron rotations, new aircraft types, bomber loads, details that could reshape Luftwaffe operations within 48 hours. Oberursel was built to harvest this intelligence with mechanical precision. Each prisoner was isolated in a single cell, alone at the moment he was most shocked, injured, and vulnerable. Oberleutnant Killinger and roughly 20 expert interrogators prepared meticulously. Before meeting any prisoner, they reviewed fat briefing folders containing everything already known, or suspected, about that man's squadron. So when a captured RAF pilot offered only his name, rank, and service number, the interrogator could casually mention a training accident involving the squadron leader, or the exact airfield layout, or the crew roster. It created a devastating illusion. We already know everything. You can't hurt anything by confirming a little. Behind the scenes, the Ossertestel West, Evaluation Center West, assembled every scrap of conversation into cross-referenced files. Tiny details, who transferred where, which unit rotated north for rest, accumulated into a shockingly accurate map of RAF strength. By mid-1941, German analysts sometimes possessed clearer knowledge of British bomber squadrons than the RAF commands themselves. And all of it, the charts, the card files, the frontline adjustments, began with those quiet rooms at Oberursel, where exhausted young men struggled to keep silent while the Luftwaffe gently tried to unravel them. And it was in one of those rooms, under that soft light and deliberate politeness, that our pilot finally realized the real battle had only just begun. He sat there beneath the soft glow of the interrogation lamp, realizing the real fight had only just begun, and he wasn't the only one trapped in that silent war. Because the intelligence he didn't give, someone else might. The information pipeline inside Nazi Germany worked with frightening speed. Whatever Dulag Luft extracted, intentionally or accidentally, shot upward through rigid channels to Luftwaffe operations staff and the Abwehr's Western Desk. Anything especially valuable landed on Göring's desk within hours. When Halifax crews were captured in June 1942 and mentioned Bomber Command experimenting with Pathfinder marker flares, German night fighter units received tactical updates within 3 days. The cycle, capture, interrogate, analyze, act, moved so quickly that many RAF crews never realized their missing comrades had already altered the battlefield. At its peak in 1943-44, the camp processed nearly 500 prisoners a month. Every one of them mattered, even the stubborn ones. A man who said nothing still arrived wearing a uniform, carrying equipment, and stepping out of an aircraft whose serial numbers and markings told their own story. German analysts photographed everything, building vast technical libraries that tracked every change in British radios, aircraft mods, even escape tools. It wasn't interrogation alone, it was a system. A machine. A factory designed to turn captured airmen into German situational awareness. And the RAF soon realized it couldn't fight that machinery with simple instructions like, "Don't talk." By late 1940, escaped airmen had returned with detailed accounts of Dulag Luft's calm, polite, psychologically sharp questioning. The Air Ministry understood the threat and built a counter-strategy, not based on brute willpower, but on training. Real training. By 1942, the RAF had developed structured capture preparation courses. Early lectures were crude warnings about German tricks, but they evolved quickly. Veteran escapers joined the instruction staff. Mock interrogations became standard. Young aircrews learned exactly what awaited them: the cold isolation cells, the friendly officer with perfect English, the harmless-seeming questions about squadron life. At the center of everything was one unbreakable rule: name, rank, number. The Geneva Convention allowed no more, and RAF commanders drilled those 3 words until they became instinct. Training sessions taught crews that exhaustion, shock, and loneliness made them vulnerable. Interrogators weren't probing for big secrets. They wanted tiny confirmations. A slip, a nod, a comment about weather on the coast, anything could be fitted into the German intelligence machine. Escaped officers reinforced the warnings with real examples. German fakes posing as RAF cellmates. Red Cross forms, designed to gather service details. Claims that other prisoners had already talked. All of it engineered to nudge a man just one step beyond the 3-word shield. But there was one interrogator who understood how to slip past that shield without force, threats, or even pressure. Hans Joachim Scharf. Born in Saxony, raised partly in South Africa, fluent in English and fluent in British psychology. He had a warm smile, gentle manners, and an uncanny ability to make RAF prisoners believe he was on their side. And for men sitting alone in those quiet Oberursel rooms, exhausted, shaken, and desperate for human connection, he was the most dangerous man they could possibly meet. Scharf's reputation didn't come from threats or cold cells. It came from the unnerving fact that men walked away from him thinking they'd said nothing, when in reality they'd given him exactly what he needed. By 1943, he'd handled hundreds of Allied prisoners, and his calm, almost gentle style had become the stuff of whispered legend at Oberursel. His genius was simple. He broke every stereotype of what an interrogator should look like. No shouting. No hard lights. No intimidation. Instead, he'd show up at a cell door with that warm half-smile and suggest a walk under the tall pine trees because the air was too nice to waste. On those walks, he never led with war questions. He talked cricket, English beaches, Bavarian beer, anything that made the prisoner forget where he was. He didn't pose as a captor. He posed as a fellow human stuck in an absurd war. And that illusion was deadly. He'd casually mention that he heard Number 44 Squadron might have shifted bases from Waddington. Before the prisoner could fall back on the name-rank-number mantra, Scharf would wave it off. Never mind, I shouldn't have asked. That move cracked people. Withdrawing the question made men feel guilty for being overly rigid. Many answered the small stuff simply to show goodwill. Little details were all he needed. Scharf also understood the power of comfort. The real English tea, the proper medical treatment for wounded pilots, even arranging new eyeglasses for a navigator, none of it was kindness for kindness' sake. He created subtle emotional debts. A man who'd been shown mercy usually wanted to return it, if only with harmless conversation. And he prepared obsessively. Before meeting any prisoner, he memorized everything in their squadron file: commanders' names, recent casualties, base layouts, even aircraft nicknames. So when he murmured, "Losing Flight Lieutenant Michaels must have hit the squadron hard," the shock alone rattled men into believing the Germans already knew everything. If they knew everything, what harm could confirming something small do? He also employed one of his sharpest tricks, the illusion of total knowledge. He'd confidently say something half true, half invented. "You boys at Koningsby must enjoy having Woodhall Spa close by, eh?" If the prisoner corrected him, he'd just handed Scharf a timeline. If he didn't, his body language usually betrayed the truth. But even Scharf's velvet glove technique hit walls. Some prisoners were simply unbreakable. Douglas Bader, the legendary fighter ace with artificial legs, became Dulag Luft's nightmare. Shot down in August 1941, he gave them nothing. Not a slip. Not a hint. Scharf offered repaired prosthetic legs, decent food, even polite conversation. Bader replied with the same 3 words every single time: name, rank, number, and then silence so thick it felt like a slap. He refused the forest walks, refused the tea, stared straight through the interrogators as if they weren't worth acknowledging. His sheer defiance became its own weapon. Younger officers who saw Bader pass through Oberursel felt morally obligated to match his iron discipline. Others resisted in quieter ways, like Aidan Crawley, captured in the western desert. Where Bader was all fire and hostility, Crawley was soft-spoken and unshakably polite. He'd chat about weather, accept cigarettes, talk about life before the war. But the second the conversation drifted toward operations, he dropped straight back into the mantra. Name, rank, number. Calm as a brick wall. To Scharf, that kind of polite stonewalling was sometimes even harder to crack than full-blown fury. Crawley's quiet resolve forced the Germans to confront something Hans Scharf rarely encountered, a man who understood every psychological trap and simply refused to step into any of them. And he wasn't alone. Some prisoners eventually realized that the Luftwaffe's all-knowing posture came from earlier slip-ups, not supernatural intelligence. Every new airman who stayed silent choked off that stream, weakening the illusion that had broken so many before. The discipline required was brutal. Days of isolation. A friendly voice offering company. A German officer gently asking whether their families knew they were alive. Nothing overtly threatening, every gesture wrapped in kindness that felt safe, even humane. But the men who endured understood one thing. Here, kindness was a weapon. So they built defenses of their own. Flight Lieutenant Johnny Wells later described treating each interrogation like a puzzle. How many times would the German rephrase the same question? Others filled their minds with Shakespeare, math equations, or entire poems, anything to keep boredom and loneliness from turning into conversation. And slowly, those tactics worked. Dulag Luft's interrogation logs from 1943 to 44 show growing frustration, entries noting prisoners who offered no information beyond Geneva requirements, or who maintained complete silence. These weren't failures of German craft. They were proof that RAF training and personal grit were beginning to blunt the Luftwaffe's most refined psychological weapons. That shift forced the Germans to escalate their deception. The infamous Red Cross trick was one of the most effective. Interrogators produced forms that looked flawlessly authentic, real insignia, perfect formatting, high-quality paper, and calmly explained that the Red Cross needed certain details to notify families and update prison records. Squadron. Aircraft type. Last base. Harmless on the surface, except every line fed directly into German intelligence. Only men who'd been warned beforehand recognized the ploy for what it was. Even more dangerous were the false friends. English-speaking German operatives were placed into cells wearing RAF uniforms, using real RAF slang, and recounting believable operational stories. Some were Germans who'd lived in Britain. Others were genuine Allied turncoats, cooperating for comfort or ideology. After days of isolation, many airmen welcomed the chance to speak with a fellow captive, and unknowingly revealed the very information they'd withheld from interrogators. Sometimes the deception grew elaborate. Germans posed as British officers conducting repatriation briefings. They forged documents, mimicked RAF administrative routines, even staged mock processing rooms. Disoriented prisoners, hungry for rescue, occasionally cooperated before realizing the truth. Interrogators also weaponized emotion. They presented forged letters from families, containing personal details lifted from intercepted mail. The goal was simple: make a prisoner believe the Germans were helping, then nudge him to confirm which squadron to forward the mail to. For exhausted men, that temptation was devastatingly strong. And the consequences of these breaches were not theoretical, they were lethal. In March 1943, several captured Halifax crews casually explained new RAF routing tactics designed to dodge expected flak patterns. Within a week, German gunners updated their defenses. The next major raid saw bomber losses jump by nearly 20%. 18 aircraft never returned. Over 100 men killed or captured, because a few exhausted prisoners believed minor details were harmless. But silence saved lives just as dramatically. German intelligence spent months in 1942 and early 1943 trying to learn how the new Pathfinder force operated. Dozens of captured Pathfinder crews held the line: name, rank, number, and nothing more. Night fighter units remained blind to the RAF's marking methods, giving Bomber Command precious time to refine tactics and improve accuracy without catastrophic losses. Each refusal mattered. A single unspoken detail kept entire bomber streams alive. And when prisoners consistently withheld confirmation of German assumptions, It forced the enemy into costly guesswork. Throughout 1944, interrogators remained convinced Britain was testing advanced jet aircraft, far beyond the prototypes Germany had. Captured pilot silence left the Luftwaffe uncertain, and that uncertainty drained analysis time and may have influenced decisions about Germany's own jet priorities. In a war fought in the skies, the smallest sentence, or the refusal to utter one, reshaped the battlefield long before engines ever turned over. The human cost of strict silence became painfully personal. Operational security demanded isolation, emotional strain, and the constant battle against loneliness. Prisoners knew their families would eventually hear they were alive, yet the urge to speak, to speed that confirmation, was overwhelming. When interrogators hinted that routine details might help notify home, refusing felt cruel. But that refusal protected countless other airmen still flying into danger.